The morning mist clung to the dense canopy above as Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison adjusted his night vision goggles and checked his weapon one final time. His SEAL team had been inserted into the mountainous forest region of eastern Afghanistan 3 days ago with a single mission: locate and extract a captured CIA operative who had been gathering intelligence on a high-value target in the area. What was supposed to be a routine extraction had quickly turned into something far more dangerous. The intelligence they had received was either outdated or completely wrong. Instead of finding a small group of insurgents holding their asset, Morrison and his 5-man team had stumbled into what appeared to be a major staging area for a planned attack on coalition forces. Petty Officer First Class. Carlos Rodriguez crouched beside a massive pine tree, his M4A1 rifle at the ready as he scanned the tree line ahead. The forest was unnaturally quiet, which set every nerve in his body on edge. After 12 years in special operations, he had learned to trust his instincts, and right now, those instincts were screaming danger. Sergeant Mike Chen, the team's communications specialist, tapped Morrison on the shoulder and pointed to his radio. They had been trying to establish contact with their command for the past 6 hours, but the dense forest and mountainous terrain were interfering with their satellite communications. They were completely cut off from any support or backup. The team had discovered the enemy compound just after dawn. Through their scopes, they counted at least 30 armed fighters, far more than they could handle with their current numbers and ammunition. Worse yet, they had spotted several advanced weapons systems that suggested this wasn't just a ragtag group of insurgents. These fighters were well-equipped and professionally trained. Morrison made the decision to withdraw and try to reach higher ground where they could establish communications and call for air support. But as they began their tactical retreat through the forest, Petty Officer Second Class Danny Williams spotted movement in the trees behind them. They were being tracked. The first shots came from their left flank just as they reached a small clearing. The distinctive crack of AK-47 fire echoed through the forest as bullets splintered the bark of trees around them. Morrison immediately called for his team to take cover as more gunfire erupted from multiple positions. Hospital Corpsman Second Class Tommy Park dove behind a fallen log just as a burst of automatic fire chewed up the ground where he had been standing seconds before. The enemy had positioned themselves in a classic ambush formation with overlapping fields of fire that made movement in any direction extremely dangerous. Chief Petty Officer Steve Anderson, the team's senior enlisted man, quickly assessed their situation. They were surrounded on 3 sides with their backs against a steep, rocky slope that would be impossible to climb under fire. The enemy fighters were using the thick forest cover to move closer to their position while maintaining sustained fire. Rodriguez tried to identify enemy positions by their muzzle flashes, but the dense foliage made it nearly impossible to get a clear shot. Every time he exposed himself to return fire, bullets would immediately pepper his position, forcing him back into cover. The enemy fighters clearly had them zeroed in and were being very methodical about tightening their noose. Chen frantically worked on his radio, trying different frequencies and power settings to break through the interference. They desperately needed to call for extraction or air support, but the mountainous terrain and thick canopy were blocking their signals completely. They were on their own. Morrison realized their ammunition situation was becoming critical. They had been in country for 3 days and had already used a significant portion of their supplies during previous contacts with enemy forces. At their current rate of fire, they would be out of ammunition within the hour. The enemy fire was becoming more accurate and more concentrated. Williams felt a bullet tug at his sleeve as he moved between positions, missing him by inches. The fighters were clearly experienced and disciplined, maintaining their positions while gradually advancing under covering fire from their teammates. Park spotted movement to their right and called out a warning just as 3 fighters attempted to flank their position. Anderson immediately shifted his fire to that sector, forcing the attackers back into cover, but it was clear that the enemy was probing for weaknesses in their defensive perimeter. As the firefight continued, Morrison began to formulate an escape plan. Their only hope was to break contact under cover of darkness, but that was still hours away. The enemy seemed content to keep them pinned down and gradually wear them down with sustained fire. Rodriguez noticed that the enemy fighters were using military-style tactics and communications. These weren't untrained insurgents. They moved with the precision and coordination of professional soldiers. Someone was clearly directing their movements and maintaining discipline in their assault. The forest around them erupted in another volley of gunfire as the enemy increased their rate of fire. Leaves and branches rained down on the SEALs as bullets shredded the vegetation above their heads. The psychological pressure of being trapped and outnumbered was beginning to take its toll on the team. Chen finally managed to get a weak signal on his radio, but before he could transmit their situation report, enemy fire forced him back into cover and he lost the connection. Their hopes of calling for immediate support were fading as quickly as their ammunition supplies. Morrison looked at his team and saw the grim determination in their eyes. They were all experienced operators who had been in difficult situations before, but this was different. They were completely isolated, outnumbered, and running low on ammunition with no immediate prospect of rescue or reinforcement. The enemy fire suddenly intensified from all directions as the fighters began their final assault on the SEAL position. Morrison knew they had only minutes before they would be completely overrun. Just as he was preparing to give the order for a desperate breakout attempt, a single shot rang out from somewhere high in the forest canopy behind them. The single rifle shot cracked through the forest like thunder, followed immediately by the distinct sound of a body hitting the ground somewhere in the trees ahead. Morrison and his team instinctively ducked lower into their defensive positions, unsure if they were about to face fire from yet another direction. Rodriguez peered through his scope toward the source of the shot, but could see nothing in the dense foliage. What he did notice was that the enemy fire from the eastern sector had suddenly stopped completely. One of the attacking positions had gone silent. Another shot rang out, this one from a different angle high in the canopy. Through the chaos of gunfire, they heard someone cry out in pain before that section of enemy fire also ceased. Whatever was happening, it wasn't the enemy shooting at them. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos had been tracking the firefight for the past 20 minutes from her concealed position in an ancient oak tree nearly 60 feet above the forest floor. As a Marine Corps sniper attached to a special reconnaissance unit operating in the area, she had been conducting surveillance on enemy movements when she heard the distinctive sound of American weapons engaged in a firefight. Santos had spent 3 days observing enemy activities in this sector and had identified several key positions and routes used by insurgent forces. When she heard the firefight erupt, she immediately moved to higher ground to assess the situation and determine if American forces needed assistance. Through her high-powered scope, she could clearly see the SEAL team pinned down in the clearing below. Surrounded by at least 15 enemy fighters positioned in a near-perfect ambush formation, the Americans were heavily outnumbered and in serious danger of being overrun. Santos began systematically identifying enemy positions and prioritizing her targets based on the immediate threat they posed to the surrounded team. Her first shot took out an enemy machine gunner who had been laying down the heaviest volume of suppressive fire on the SEAL position. Her second shot eliminated a fighter who was attempting to coordinate the assault using hand signals to direct other attackers toward the American position. With their leader down, the remaining fighters in that sector began to lose coordination and their attack faltered. Down in the clearing, Chen noticed the change in enemy tactics immediately. The concentrated fire that had been keeping them pinned down was becoming sporadic and uncoordinated. Someone or something was disrupting the enemy assault. Morrison cautiously raised his head and scanned the tree line through his scope. He could see muzzle flashes from enemy positions, but they seemed to be firing wildly rather than with the disciplined accuracy they had demonstrated earlier. The attackers appeared to be confused and disorganized. Santos continued her methodical elimination of enemy targets, moving her position slightly after each shot to avoid detection. Her third shot took down a fighter who was attempting to flank the SEAL position from the north, while her fourth eliminated another machine gunner who was providing covering fire for the flanking maneuver. The enemy fighters were beginning to realize they were taking casualties from an unknown sniper, but they couldn't determine the direction of the incoming fire. Santos was using the natural acoustics of the forest and her elevated position to mask her location while maintaining clear lines of sight to her targets. Anderson saw an opportunity as the enemy fire slackened and called out to his teammates. If they could identify the remaining enemy positions while their unknown ally continued to thin out the attackers, they might be able to break out of their defensive perimeter and reach better ground. Williams spotted two fighters attempting to withdraw from their position and took careful aim with his rifle. His shots were accurate, eliminating both targets before they could escape and report on the SEAL team's exact location to other enemy units in the area. Santos observed the Americans beginning to take more aggressive action and adjusted her targeting to support their movements. She identified 3 enemy fighters who were positioned to intercept any breakout attempt and systematically eliminated them with precisely placed shots. Park noticed that the enemy fire was now coming from only 2 positions instead of the dozen or more that had been engaging them earlier. Whatever was happening, their mysterious benefactor was evening the odds dramatically in their favor. Rodriguez moved to a new firing position and spotted an enemy fighter attempting to set up a rocket-propelled grenade launcher aimed at their defensive perimeter. He took the shot just as Santos fired at the same target from her elevated position. Both rounds found their mark, eliminating the threat before the fighter could engage. The remaining enemy fighters realized their assault was failing and began attempting to withdraw from their positions. Santos continued to engage targets as they moved, preventing them from conducting an organized retreat that might allow them to regroup and attack again later. Morrison made the decision to advance on the remaining enemy positions while they still had the advantage. He signaled to his team, and they began moving forward in tactical formation, providing covering fire for each other as they cleared the remaining attackers. Chen finally managed to establish radio contact with their command center and quickly transmitted their position and situation. However, he also reported that an unknown friendly sniper was providing overwatch and had been instrumental in breaking up the enemy ambush. Anderson and Williams cleared the last enemy position and confirmed that the immediate area was secure. The firefight that had seemed hopeless just minutes before was now over, thanks largely to the intervention of their unknown ally in the forest canopy above. Santos maintained her overwatch position and scanned the surrounding area for any additional threats. Through her scope, she could see the SEAL team reorganizing and establishing a defensive perimeter around their position. They appeared to be uninjured and in good condition despite the intense firefight. Morrison attempted to locate their benefactor by scanning the tree line with his scope, but the forest was too dense and the sniper's position too well concealed. He called out a general thanks toward the forest canopy, hoping their ally could hear him. Park was treating minor wounds on 2 team members who had been injured by flying debris during the firefight. Both men were in good condition and capable of continuing the mission, but they would need to be more careful about exposure to enemy fire. The immediate threat was over, but Morrison knew they were still deep in enemy territory with a compromised mission and limited communications. They needed to link up with their mysterious ally and determine the best course of action for extraction or mission completion. Santos made the decision to reveal her position and make contact with the American team below. She had been operating alone in this sector for several days and could provide valuable intelligence about enemy movements and positions in the area. Santos began her careful descent from the oak tree, moving slowly to avoid making any noise that might alert remaining enemy forces in the area. She had survived 3 days alone in hostile territory by being extremely cautious, and she wasn't about to compromise her position now. Morrison heard a soft whistle from the forest behind their position and turned to see a figure in camouflaged Marine Corps fatigues emerging from the tree line. The sniper moved with the fluid grace of someone completely comfortable in the forest environment, her rifle held in a low, ready position. Rodriguez immediately brought his weapon up, but Morrison raised his hand to signal that the approaching figure was friendly. The Marine's uniform and equipment were clearly American, and more importantly, she was approaching from the direction where the sniper fire had originated. Santos stopped about 20 meters from the SEAL perimeter and called out the current day's authentication codes. Morrison responded with the proper countercodes, confirming that both units were legitimate American forces operating in the area. As she approached their position, the SEALs could see that Santos was a compact woman in her early 30s, with the weathered appearance of someone who had spent considerable time in combat zones. Her equipment was well maintained, and her movements were precise and professional. Morrison extended his hand as Santos reached their perimeter. She introduced herself as Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, Marine Corps Scout Sniper, attached to 2nd Force Reconnaissance Company. She had been conducting surveillance operations in the region for the past week. Santos quickly briefed Morrison on what she had observed during her time in the area. The enemy compound they had discovered was actually a major staging area for a planned attack on a coalition forward operating base located about 15 kilometers to the south. The attack was scheduled to begin within the next 24 hours. She had been gathering intelligence on enemy strength and positions when she heard their firefight and made the decision to intervene. Her actions had not only saved the SEAL team, but had also provided an opportunity to disrupt the enemy's operational plans. Chen was able to establish solid communications with their command center using Santos's more powerful radio equipment. He quickly transmitted their current situation and the intelligence Santos had gathered about the planned enemy attack. The command center immediately recognized the critical importance of the intelligence and authorized the teams to continue their mission with a new objective. Instead of simply extracting, they were now tasked with conducting surveillance and target identification for an incoming airstrike on the enemy compound. Anderson examined the enemy weapons and equipment left behind from the firefight. The weapons were modern and well-maintained, confirming that they were dealing with a professional military unit rather than typical insurgent forces. This information would be valuable for planning the airstrike. Williams and Park established security positions, while Morrison and Santos planned their approach to the enemy compound. Santos had detailed knowledge of enemy patrol routes and defensive positions that would be essential for getting close enough to conduct effective surveillance. Santos explained that the enemy had established a sophisticated network of observation posts and patrol routes throughout the forest. However, she had identified several gaps in their coverage that could be exploited to reach suitable observation positions overlooking the compound. Rodriguez was impressed by the precision of Santos's earlier shooting and asked about her background. She explained that she had been a competitive shooter before joining the Marines and had completed multiple combat deployments as a sniper in Iraq and Afghanistan. The team began moving toward the enemy compound using routes that Santos had scouted during her previous reconnaissance. She led them through dense forest areas where the thick canopy would conceal them from any aerial observation while avoiding known enemy patrol routes. Chen maintained communications with their command center, providing regular position updates and receiving intelligence about friendly forces in the area. The airstrike was being coordinated with other operations to maximize the impact on enemy capabilities. As they approached the compound, Santos identified several key observation positions that would provide clear lines of sight to important targets while maintaining adequate concealment and escape routes. The team would need to establish multiple positions to cover all critical areas. Morrison assigned specific sectors to each team member based on their specialties and the available observation positions. Santos would provide overwatch and engage any targets that posed immediate threats to the team, while the others focused on target identification and laser designation. Park established a casualty collection point in a concealed location that could serve as a rally point if the team needed to withdraw quickly. His medical supplies and training would be essential if anyone was injured during the upcoming operation. Anderson set up the laser target designator and began identifying specific buildings and equipment that would be priority targets for the airstrike. The compound contained several ammunition storage areas and vehicle maintenance facilities that would be high-value targets. Williams established communications with the incoming aircraft and began coordinating the target identification process. The pilots would need precise coordinates and detailed descriptions of each target to ensure accuracy and minimize collateral damage. Santos noticed increased activity in the compound as enemy fighters began preparing vehicles and loading equipment. It appeared that the planned attack was moving ahead of schedule, making the timing of their airstrike even more critical. Rodriguez spotted several high-value targets moving through the compound, including what appeared to be senior leaders coordinating the preparation activities. He began documenting their movements and positions for potential engagement during the airstrike. Chen received confirmation that the strike aircraft were approaching their target area and would be ready to commence the attack within minutes. All team members reported their positions and confirmed they were ready to begin the target designation process. Morrison gave the final authorization to commence the airstrike as Santos maintained her overwatch position. The operation that had begun as a simple extraction mission had evolved into a critical strike against enemy forces that threatened coalition operations throughout the region. The first explosions lit up the forest as precision-guided munitions found their targets in the compound below. Santos continued to scan for any enemy forces that might attempt to escape or counterattack their position as the successful mission reached its conclusion. The SEAL team and their Marine sniper ally had turned a desperate situation into a significant victory against enemy forces, demonstrating the effectiveness of joint operations and the critical importance of adaptability in combat situations.